right, you're probably going to recognize our next guest. He's Michael Fanone. He's a police officer that was at the Capitol on January 6th. He actually had a heart attack there and some traumatic brain injury as well. He's got a new book out called "Hold the Line: The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul." Michael, welcome, brother.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
No problem. So, Michael, I want to get to something controversial that I'm not sure you've been asked. Maybe you have. We'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to have people understand who you are, because people might have seen you on TV talking about January 6th, and they might assume that you're a lifelong Democrat or something. And I know the Republicans have made up conspiracy theories about you, about how you're some sleeper cell or something along those lines. But who'd you vote for in 2016?
2016, I voted for Donald Trump.
Okay, how'd that turn out for you?
What? Obviously, I regret that decision.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about January 6th a little bit now that we got that out of the way. So you were not on the scene originally, right? What were you doing that day and in general, and at the Capitol? And how'd you know to go to the Capitol when you got the call?
Well, I guess for those of you that don't know, I'll give you a little bit of background. So I began my law enforcement career immediately after 9/11. I joined the United States Capitol Police. I was there for about a year, and I lateraled over to the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C., where I spent 2 decades, primarily working in narcotics and other small mission units within the department. On January 6th, I was assigned to one of those small mission units, and I was supposed to be doing a drug buy that day. That morning or late morning, I remember hearing reports from officers that were already at work that there were individuals being arrested as part of the Stop the Steal rally for possessing firearms, and that there were other individuals that were seen in possession of firearms. And then later, a short time after that, I was hearing reports that a large group had broken off from that rally and were headed to the Capitol.
So, yes, but at what point in your career did you become a sleeper cell for Nancy Pelosi?
At no point in my career was I a sleeper cell for Nancy Pelosi.
Look, before January 6th, in your wildest dreams, would you have imagined that you get accused of that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of cops that knew me throughout my career that are laughing their asses off because, I mean, I was the definition of a Fox News consumer. I hated CNN, was not a fan of MSNBC, and yeah, I mean, I bought in completely to the Donald Trump. We love law enforcement. We love the military rhetoric.
Yeah. So I'm going to divert here for a second. I'm going to come back to January 6th. I'm going to come back to the controversial question. But since you were on that side, right? You had voted for Trump. You're watching Fox News. You believe all that stuff. Now you see that a healthy chunk of those folks have lost their minds, right? They have all these conspiracy theories about you, for example. I mean, they beat you with a Blue Lives Matter flag. I mean, it doesn't get any more crazy, hypocritical, and ironic than that. They tase you. I mean, they brutally attack you, had a heart attack, etc. And you're a cop, and they pretended to be pro-cop all along. And folks have kind of lost their minds. Had you noticed people losing their minds before January 6th? Did you notice it afterwards? Are there people in your personal life who are still Republicans and think, hey, I don't know, man, you or Trump, I don't know who to trust here, etc. You see what I'm saying?
No, I totally get it. I mean, to explain my own situation, in 2016, I was a single issue voter. My issue was law enforcement. I had been a cop at that point for about a decade and a half, and I saw the violence against law enforcement in the wake of the police shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, and some other incidents that occurred involving law enforcement, in which I believe that rhetoric being used by members of the Democratic Party resulted in violence against police officers, specifically the assassination-style killings of police officers across the country. When I heard Donald Trump come along and espouse rhetoric in support of law enforcement, that's all it took for me to buy in. I saw one party as being anti-law enforcement. I saw another party as being pro-law enforcement. I know now that it was more pandering than anything else, but that was my reasoning for supporting Donald Trump in 2016. I don't think anybody lost their minds as of recently. I think that was the case all along. But if you were like me and you only sourced your news from Fox News, you weren't hearing any alternatives to the propaganda that they put out with regards to those types of issues and the way that what I would describe as Trump supporters view those types of issues.
Yeah, well, in my parlance, I would say it was Fox News that made them lose their minds, but I think we're saying the same thing. So, all right, back to January 6th. You get there and you said something about 40 cops that were in bad shape in a hallway or something along those lines. What was that, Michael?
Yeah, so when I originally got there, I made my way along with my partner, Jimmy Albright, to what's known as the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. For those that aren't familiar, the Lower West Terrace Tunnel is a ceremonial location in the Capitol where the president-elect walks out onto the inaugural stage to take the oath of office. The tunnelway itself is probably about 250 feet long, and it's about as wide as maybe 4 or 5 adults standing shoulder to shoulder. When I got down into the tunnel, I saw about 40 or 50 police officers doing their best to prevent thousands of violent rioters from entering through the tunnel entranceway. These officers had been there for several hours prior to my arrival. Most of them were part of the initial MPD contingent that responded to the Capitol around 1 p.m. I got there about 3 p.m. These officers had fought unrelieved for that entire 2 hours. And the fighting there was intense. I mean, it was brutal. And to describe the scene, I mean, you could not slide a credit card between two individuals inside that tunnelway.
So, Michael, normally when you have a situation like that with cops, I mean, first of all, you normally never have a situation like that with cops. But if you had 2 cops that were in trouble, let alone the hundreds overall at the Capitol building that were in trouble, you'd have about 1 million cops on the spot in a second and a half, right? Why weren't there way more cops there?
Well, first of all, you have to understand law enforcement in Washington, D.C. There's about 70 plus law enforcement agencies in the District of Columbia. You have the Metropolitan Police Department, which I belong to, which was the traditional law enforcement agency. Essentially, if you call 911, we're the ones that would respond. But then you have federal law enforcement agencies like the United States Capitol Police. Their sole mission is to protect the Capitol campus, as well as members of Congress and those that are visiting or working within the Capitol compound. I think that there were significant failures on the part of the executives within that department to properly prepare for the potential for violence on January 6th. They were clearly understaffed. Their officers were not appropriately equipped. And they also, I don't believe, were properly trained to handle an event of that magnitude.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I think that, when you're dealing with thousands, and I mean, by all estimates, we're talking between 15 and 20,000 individuals storming the Capitol grounds. I mean, even with hundreds of officers responding as quickly as they possibly could, we were overwhelmed. And we were fighting for our lives. At some points, we were outnumbered 3 and even as high as 5 to 1.
So, Michael, that finally leads me to my question that I've been wanting to ask you this whole time. I don't know if you get this question all the time or if you've never gotten it before. But as I looked at it, my main question was, why didn't you guys shoot them?
Yeah, I mean, I have gotten that question, but I appreciate you asking it. There are very specific policies and protocols that dictate the way police officers in America can use force against other Americans, and appropriately so. And the policy, what it says is that a police officer may use deadly force when they believe that their life or the life of another individual is in jeopardy. That being said, you are accountable for every round that you fire from your weapon. And in a situation where you have individuals who are in such close proximity, I may identify, as I did when I was out in the crowd, individuals who I believed pose a deadly threat to me. And then I was authorized to use deadly force against them. That being said, had I drawn my weapon, it was most likely that it would have been stripped away from me, probably used against me. And if I did get off several rounds, even aiming at my intended target, who's to say that I wouldn't hit another individual? And while you say that, yes, they were part of an insurrectionist mob, it still doesn't mean that each and every one of them posed a deadly threat to me or to other officers. They may have been guilty of committing crimes, but they wouldn't have been guilty of committing crimes that would have risen to the level of having deadly force used against them. We don't have, go ahead.
Yeah, so Michael, look, I generally agree with most of the things that you say. I've seen you on TV, and obviously we've gone through this interview, but I'm not as pro cop as you are. You've been a cop, for over 2 decades, and I've seen a lot of police abuse that we cover. And so let me challenge you on what you're saying. I find it inconceivable that if those folks were black or Muslim, that you guys wouldn't have shot. Man, they nearly killed you. You had a heart attack. They attacked you. They grabbed at your gun. They tased your neck over and over again. You're telling me that in other circumstances where it wasn't white right-wingers, you guys wouldn't have shot the living crap out of those guys? I don't believe that for a second.
I mean, all I can tell you is, what my experience was that day. And my experience that day, politics played nothing in the way that I used force, as it has throughout my 20-year career in law enforcement. At no point in time did I ever take into consideration the race or political creed of the individuals that I was encountering. I mean, unfortunately, there are many instances of police misconduct. I would never say that law enforcement is above reproach or not in need of reform. But I categorically disagree with you in your assessment of what happened on January 6th. I think that the officers that responded there that day used incredible restraint and acted professionally and did the profession a huge service in showing what and how law enforcement officers should engage with American citizens.
So, Michael, let me clarify. So I'm not saying that I don't believe you in how you would have acted, right? And my God, you nearly died. So if you had to prove that you had restraint, check, you proved it, okay? And I'm not saying that the cops overall that day didn't show restraint. They showed incredible restraint. No, that's a right-wing talking point that you guys weren't restrained enough as they were kicking the crap out of you guys and nearly killing you, right? I don't believe that at all. I think it was the most amazing restraint I've ever seen from American law enforcement. But Michael, we see it on tape all the time, dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of videos. I mean, a black guy pulls out a phone, he's dead. He doesn't even have a phone. He tells a cop he's got a legal gun. He's dead. He's got $20 that he's getting investigated on. He's dead. You tell me you had 15, 20,000, and you pick a minority, the Muslims storming the Capitol, and nearly killing the cops, and sometimes actually killing the cops, that they wouldn't have fired into the crowd. Can you see why I'd be skeptical about that?
I understand why people are skeptical of law enforcement actions, especially in the United States of America. That being said, I obviously have a different perspective on some of these incidents than probably you would have. And I'm coming into it as a career law enforcement officer. You take Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, and I'm quite certain that your first conclusion that you would draw is that Derek Chauvin was a racist. I don't know if Derek Chauvin was a racist, but I do know that when Derek Chauvin interacted with George Floyd, he had lost sight of the humanity of George Floyd. He didn't treat him like a human being, he treated him like an animal. And that is a pitfall that many law enforcement officers fall into throughout their careers. This is a profession that places human beings in contact with other human beings when they are at their worst. And we see it day in and day out. And there is no mechanism currently in law enforcement to address that. And I think that that's a problem. If you read through my book, that's one of the issues that I try to tackle is, how is it that we can address this, what I see as an officer wellness issue when it comes to police officers losing sight of the humanity of the individuals that they're charged with protecting, and also reminding those officers that their job is to protect the people that they are serving. We are not an occupying military force.
But Michael, so last thing here, that gets to why I asked the question, because you had to write that in your book, because oftentimes police in America do act like an occupying force. And so you might not have shot. And by the way, 80% of the cops there might not have shot if it was black folks or Muslim folks or whoever else it might be, right? But there's Chauvins in the crowd, right? In the among the police. And so I've always said it's the training. It's the training. We always tell the cops your lives are more important than other people's. Better to be judged by 12 than carried out by 6. Every cop in the country's probably heard that dozens of times, right? And so in a situation where your guys' lives are actually on the line, maybe it's just subconscious, but if that crowd looked different, it is near impossible for me to believe that at least a couple of the hundreds of officers there wouldn't have started shooting into the crowd. And in a sense, I feel like the right wingers have no idea how good they have it. I mean, like not getting shot in that situation, to me, was white privilege defined.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me if there's racist cops, yes, there are racist cops. Law enforcement is a microcosm of society. There's racist people in American society. There's racist people all over the world. I mean, that's just a reality. Do I know if there's actually a way to rid law enforcement of that? I don't know. That being said, I was also a police officer throughout the IMF protests in Washington, D.C. and the BLM protests. And I also saw examples of law enforcement officers acting with immense restraint in the face of pretty extreme levels of violence. And so I would just have to disagree with you. Are there incidences? Absolutely. But do I think that overall that racial profiling or racism is the problem? I would go back to what you just said, which is training. Training is a huge issue within law enforcement, and that's what needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, we definitely disagree on some parts. I wasn't on the ground, but the IMF protests and the Black Lives Matter protests were nowhere near as violent as the January 6th ones, especially towards cops. I mean, they tried to shred you guys on January 6th, and like I said, they nearly killed a couple of you. And so on the other hand, we definitely agree it's the training, and we have to teach cops. These are citizens you're supposed to protect and to serve. And yes, you're supposed to do as you did, Michael, on January 6th. Take a little bit of risk with your life to make sure citizens don't get killed. You wound up taking extraordinary risk. And I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying. I not only appreciate your service on that day, but you had tremendous valor for not shooting. I don't want cops shooting into white protesters or right-wing protesters. That's nuts, right? I just want the same treatment for African Americans and everyone else in the country. So if people read Hold the Line and they get that out of your book, great. Or if they get it from your example, great. But the entire country, in a lot of ways, wishes there were more restraint, like we saw on January 6th. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, what I tell officers, or what I told officers that I worked with, was just because you can shoot, just because you are justified to shoot, doesn't mean that you have to shoot.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you definitely proved it, because you had every right to shoot and you didn't. All right, Michael Fanone, his book is Hold the Line. Everybody check it out. Thanks for joining us, appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.